Welcome to Communicology. I'm Richard Talbert. I'm an associate professor of communication and media, and I love studying how people communicate. I also love studying how communication and culture intersect. Today I want to talk a little bit deeper into the concept of culture that we discussed on a previous episode. And the idea of culture, remember, was the idea of a way of life, the way that people do certain things. So when people gather, there's a way that they do things. So whether you're talking a small group, like your group of friends, there's a culture in your group of friends, to maybe a classroom has a culture, or a sports team has a culture. Families have their own culture. So it doesn't have to be this huge, wide thing like a region or a country in the way that they do things, although that is part of it. The idea of how do people, when they assemble, the things that they do, the way that they live life and organize. So the idea of way of life as culture moving in, well, that's well and good until you have to move into a new culture. Well, how do I do that? And we've had situations where you go to maybe travel to a new place, or you transfer schools, or you go from high school to college, or college to the workplace, or from one job to another job. And it's not at all like it, you thought it was going to be, or like the last job was. And you have all of these different things that kind of poke in your head like, man, this isn't right. Something's not right. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because you went from one culture to another culture. A lot of times you'll hear people when they're in high school, especially, they'll say, I can't wait till I graduate from high school. I'm going to get out of this town, this bubble of a town. Well, in all honesty, you're leaving one bubble and going to another. That bubble is the culture of that town, or the culture of that high school. You're going to move to another bubble. So you're going to move to another town and get that bubble. You're going to go to that college and go to that bubble. Or you're going to go from one job to another job and from one bubble to the next. And it's not the same bubble. Just because it's a bubble doesn't mean it's the same kind of bubble. So we wrestle with those kind of ideas, and we have a hard time sometimes, trying to understand, how do I fit in here? And that's part of the thing. So you can either join, or you can wrestle, or you can quit. And, so we deal with those kind of issues when we study communication, especially when we call what's known as newcomer socialization. So how someone's socialized into understanding the new social behavior, the social norms, the culture of a new place, and so when someone's new, so a newcomer coming into the socialization norms of that place. So the concept of newcomer socialization has been studied quite extensively. The nice thing is it's broken down into 4 easy steps to kind of understand how it works. Now, the first step, the first stage, is called the anticipatory stage. I like to also call it like the honeymoon stage. So you have this idea of what's it going to be like. Maybe you did your homework before you went. A lot of times college students will go on a college tour and they'll visit the college to get an idea of what's it like. Or when you go on a job interview, you should always be looking, what's the culture like here? Do the people look happy? Or is everyone living in cubes? Do they have big, bright colors, or is it like all dreary and gray? Do people put up pictures in their cubes, or do they just they're just all just kind of existing? People don't think of looking at those things. They just focus, I want to get the job. They don't sit there and say, but what's it like here? And you can ask the interviewer, what's it like here? And of course, they're going to speak in glowing terms. They're trying to hire you. You're not going to bash their own location. So it's up to you sometimes to be alert, to do your homework, to study and understand that this is a place where I could see myself being, or I don't want to come here. The job sounds great, but I don't think I want to go here. The idea that a college is a college is a college is a college, it is pushed by a lot of people who don't understand culture or don't understand colleges. They're vastly different. A college of, the smallest college I ever taught at had 400 students. I mean, everybody knew everybody's business, and you couldn't get away from that. But it's also one of those things that if you like a close-knit family, that was a place to go. If you liked anonymity, it was a terrible place. I've also taught at a college of, biggest one was 6,600 students or so, and the largest class I ever taught in that situation was 76, and that was, for me as an instructor, terrible, because you could see that first row of people, then everyone became a blur as they went off into the distance. And you couldn't have interaction with people. You could never get to know their names. There's just too many students. So I've had classes with one, classes with two, classes with three, and it's just one of those things where you could have nice, tight discussions and sit around a table instead of just a stand-up lecture to everybody. So again, you can have that kind of a variety and change inside of a college, or else college to college to college. It could be very different. A jobs-based, practitioner-based college is different than a liberal arts college. And the way that they approach education from the foundation is different. So it's one of those things where, getting into it and understanding it is a difficult thing to sometimes grasp, but you've got to pay attention. Anytime you're moving to a different culture, you're thinking, what's this going to be like? So that's why we're anticipating in the anticipatory stage. Now, why I also call it a honeymoon stage is, you show up and everything is great. You get married, things are lovely, everything's wonderful, and there are no speed bumps. And if they are, they're just, that's just the quirks of that person. It's no big deal. And everything's lovely and wonderful. So when someone's dating, they first start dating, that other person can do no wrong. And it's just a wonderful time to be alive. Well, you get that new job and it's fresh and exciting, or you go to college and everything's new and exciting and different, and wow, this is great. And then the second phase comes, and that is the encounter stage, or a stage of conflict. So we go from honeymoon to conflict. Conflict is where, the cracks start to appear, and they're not just little they're little quirks, they're like real things. So maybe you don't like that your significant other leaves socks all over the floor, and it's not a cute quirk anymore. It's kind of annoying. And those kind of things come to play, that the boss at the workplace no longer says, you're the new guy, it's okay, no problem, to, hey, you should have this figured out by now, get on it. And all of a sudden, this doesn't seem fun anymore. And so you start seeing all of the things for what they really are, because we get those rose-colored glasses during that honeymoon phase, and everything's great until, the glasses start to come off and we start to go, I'm not sure I really like this place as much as I did. So that conflict comes, and we start to go on this downward trajectory, and we start dropping and dropping and dropping. This is a critical part for newcomer socialization. And it's not necessarily on the company's job, the organization's job, the culture's job to fix it for you. This is where it comes down to you and your personal maturity. Because to move to the next phase, which is the metamorphosis stage, or basically a stage of adjustment. So you have the conflict, and now you fall, and then you have a stage of adjustment where you can start, turning things around, or decide that you're going to jet, whichever one happens. But you're doing that free fall. Your maturity is going to determine how long and how abrupt that free fall is. So if you're a kind of person who's very stubborn, who thinks your way is the right way, your way is the only way, and you should get what you want, go to that full extreme of narcissism, you can guess that fall is going to be terrible. I'm going to keep doing what I'm going to do, and everyone's going to have to bend to my will. Look, cultures, as we've discussed before, they're hard to establish and they're hard to change. They change, but they change slowly. You are not going to be the one that changes a 100-year-old company or a 150-year-old college who's been doing things their way. You buy into it, you came there, you buy into it or get out. So you have to choose, do I want to buy in or not? There was some magic there in that upward phase where we're enjoying that honeymoon moment. And then we hit that conflict and we start to fall. How can we get back to that honeymoon moment? Now, granted, if we weren't very good in that moment of anticipating how things really are, again, we went in with super rose-colored glasses, like this is going to be great, it's going to be wonderful, and weren't critical and really evaluated things, you can guess it's going to be hard to go back to that phase. But if you were critical and enjoyed the things that were, and said, now I've had conflict, I wish I could go back to that, you can. And again, that's based on your maturity. It's not that everyone else changed. It's just that you started noticing the bumps and started to critique and sometimes hyper-focus on those bumps. Like a significant other who does this quirky thing. It's cute, and then all of a sudden now you don't like it. The thing still existed on both sides of that hump, but you decide now that I don't like it. That's your choice. And it's also your choice of how big you blow it up. Like leaving socks on the floor, you know, a big problem that residence life has in colleges. Residence life exists to make sure students quit fighting with each other. And it's one of those things that you move from a house, you get your own room, you understand the rules of your parents and why you should do it. That you go to a college and all of a sudden, well, I should be able to get to do what I want. I'm an adult now. And I'm out on my own. Even though you're not on your own, you're in the college, you're not on your own. You're living in a dorm with a bunch of other people, and now you have a roommate, which maybe you didn't have back home, and the room's cut in half, and you might be an early riser who's a neat freak who studies hard, and the other person's a late night owl who's messy and doesn't care about studying. There's going to be a lot of conflict there. And so residence life's job is not to just say, well, let's just move this person out and put another person in. It's to figure out, like, look, you are an adult. The other person is an adult. You need to learn how to come together and live with each other, because that's what adulthood is. Being around a lot of people that sometimes you get along well with and sometimes you don't. So you see that encounter stage where you're falling. When do I make adjustment? When do I go through that metamorphosis, changing from the caterpillar to a butterfly? And you can see how that's hard, because, we want our own thing. We want what's best for us, especially if it's I chose this college because I'm hoping to get a good education so I can go do this long, fulfilling career. Or it could be a situation where, like, I came to work for this job hoping that this would be a good paying job where I could work on my career, get all kinds of valuable skills, make some money, maybe buy a house, so be able to support a family, that kind of a thing. And when things aren't working out, we tend to really want to react real harshly, because we just can't believe that maybe we made the wrong decision, or maybe that our thinking is wrong or our thinking is off. Now, it is possible that, lo and behold, you go into an organization that you thought you did good research and you find out that there are some lousy aspects that were hidden from you, and there's no way you could have known. It's also possible you could have a new boss that comes in who's lousy. I once worked for a company that in the year and a quarter I worked there, it was just a year and a quarter, my department had a 60% turnover of employees. It was one of those things that, you might have 2-3% throughout a year because people retire or people quit or people move, that kind of thing. But 60% turnover, when I left that company, I was the last one to leave that department because HR finally stepped in and said, this is wrong. And they demoted the manager and dissolved the whole department. Because that's a clear sign there's something wrong. That wasn't evident or viewable or knowable because after I joined, they had a 60% turnover after I had been there. So it's one of those things that I couldn't have found that out because it was a thing that happened in the future. Now, so on one hand, yeah, you need to be analyze yourself. Am I being too critical? Am I trying to be too narcissistic and do everything for me? Or is this a situation where things have genuinely changed, truly changed, and I can't control it? But what I can control is my response. So I choose in that adjustment phase that I'm going to say to myself, I like my job, I like my career, I like my coworkers. This is worth me sucking it up and fixing what's wrong with me, or trying to figure out how to work with the people I'm having problems with to try to make that change. Or potentially it's one of the situations where this is actually getting far worse than I thought it was, and I wish I would have known these things. I would have never taken this job. I would have taken that other one. And it's time to bail. And that's where we move to our fourth phase, our fourth stage. And depending on which way you look at it, it's one of either exit or of mastery. So I had that honeymoon phase where I'm doing the anticipatory, I'm trying to understand what it's like, and everything's kind of great and rosy. And then I come across some kind of crisis moments where I'm encountering the organization, its issues, and now I'm plummeting, and I plummet until I finally do that metamorphosis stage and I do some kind of adjustment. Now I choose, am I going to master the culture or am I going to exit? The problem comes, with that choice, because no one can really truly make that choice for you. Our natural reaction comes in to either do the fight or flight. So I'm going to fight for myself, for my job, for my family, for my career, for whatever reasons you have. And I'm going to make a change. I'm going to adjust. I'm going to adopt this culture. I'm going to master it. Or, you know what, this is not what I expected, not what I signed up for, not what I want, or I'm just afraid, or I'm very narcissistic and I know better and everything. I'm just going to just bail and go find the next place. One sign when you get to that exit phase, if you've had multiple situations where you always chose to exit, that's probably a sign that it's with you, because the odds of you having bad situation after bad situation after bad situation after bad situation, you're the most unlucky person on the planet, not likely, or there is something wrong with you in the way that you choose to deal with that metamorphosis stage. It's not a good place for you. The college transfer portal for student athletics is kind of showing that kind of a thing. You'll see a student who'll go from program, enter the portal, go to program, portal, and hop around. It's like you're only in college for 4 years and you've hopped in that portal so many times. That's because they're looking for the thing that fits them exactly the way they want. They're not willing to change, and that in that way, in that regard, the portal has absolutely hurt college athletics instead of having a situation where commit to the team, commit to the culture, and master that culture and be a productive person inside that culture and on that team. It's the same thing with a family, same thing with work, same thing with your friendships, same thing with college. It's like I said, it's your own case that you have to work with, your own humility that you have to recognize in yourself as you hit that conflict and you start plummeting. How soon till you hit that stage where I'm going to decide I'm going to change? I'm going to work at mastering and being a better, more productive person, because you can butt your head against that wall over and over and over, but that culture really most likely isn't going to change for you. It's just not, because people there were happy, until you came along and started butting your head. And they do that every time someone new comes along. It's, people who work at a place, they get that little bit of fear, like, oh boy, what's this new guy going to be like? Oh, this Richard Talbert guy, he's like stirring the pot, he's like butting his head against the wall and kind of cause problems. Well, do you think they're going to like you and want to work with you? It's one thing if there's an injustice or something clearly wrong or illegal going on, but it's different if you're like, I just don't like it. Well, you came into that system. They liked it. And then you came in and tried to muck it up. So again, exit or decide that you're going to master and make that change. That is a key thing for moving into a culture, because you have that situation and you've done it, where the idea of culture shock, you go into a culture and it's just radically different. You're not expecting it and it's different. Maybe you've heard the phrase, the ugly American traveler, the idea of the American who goes to some foreign country and says, this isn't like America. I want things done for me like it is back home. If you're in Spain, why would you expect them to be like America? They're like Spain. So if a Spaniard came to America, they should expect it to be like America. And if an American went to Spain, it should just be like Spain. But the ugly American, I want it to be my way. Why did you go to Spain then? Stay home if you wanted it your way. Same thing anytime you go to any kind of culture. You move to a new job, you move to a new friend group, you move to a new college, whatever you do, you're in this situation of, look, it's up to me to study this culture. So that anticipatory stage, not be rose-colored glass crazy, like in that honeymoon. And then when you get to the culture, that encounter phase, you say, okay, trouble's coming. How do I handle the trouble? This is my maturity kicking in. How do I handle that trouble? How long do I let that conflict slide happen until I say, you know what? No, I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to adjust or I'm going to bail. So you hit that metamorphosis stage where you do have that adjustment, and I say, I'm going to change and be a better part of this culture. I'm going to join this culture and be part of it. And I can find my place and work. Or you have the idea of exiting and mastery is that fourth phase. Like, I'm going to exit or I'm going to master this. And those are hard phases to go through because, quite frankly, we don't like change. Cultures don't like change, but we're one person. So if we choose to move into a culture, we should accept that culture is the way it is for a reason. And if we don't like that culture, why shoehorn ourselves into it? And you see that across the country, you see it across the world, you see that in organizations, you see that in towns, you see it where different cultural expectations come in and say, I'm going to change this place to my culture. Why did you go there in the first place? Find some place that is more your speed, and your style. I have a certain set of beliefs. I have political beliefs, religious beliefs. I'm not going to go to a place that's uber hostile to them and expect them to change for me. Either I don't go there in the first place, or I go there knowing my role and just working in it. So when you get a chance to move into a culture, think of that newcomer socialization thing. So you're not so gripped by culture shock and you realize that I need to be open and wise. I need to be mature, and I need to just ask myself, do I want to be part of this culture? And if so, I need to be part of the culture, not they need to fix themselves for me. So thank you very much for tuning into Communicology. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard today, that's okay. I'm glad you stayed around and listened this long. But next time, I'll see you for another episode of Communicology.